Under the copper-stained sky, Clara Beauty walked alone through the dying heat of the Wild West afternoon. The wind pushed at her back like an impatient hand, carrying with it the scent of sage and old fires. Dust clung to her hair, her skirt, her cracked lips. Every step hurt. Every breath felt borrowed. The land stretched endlessly around her, gold and red and cruelly silent. When her knees gave out beside a brittle patch of mesquite, she whispered to no one, "I can't walk any. Oh, let me stay one night." The sound was lost to the wind, but the plea hung in the air like a prayer that refused to die. Somewhere far off, a horse snorted. The faint rhythm of hooves began to roll closer, slow and steady, like the heart of the desert itself. Clara lifted her head, squinting through the glare. A figure approached through the shimmering heat, a man in a wide hat, his shape wavering between shadow and sunlight. For a moment she thought he might vanish like a mirage. But the sound of leather creaked and the glint of metal caught the light. It was real. The rider slowed to a halt. His horse, a chestnut mare, breathed hard and pawed the ground. The man dismounted, his boots sinking into the dry soil with a soft thud. His eyes were gray, quiet but watchful. "You lost?" he asked. His voice was gentle, but beneath it lived something wearier than age. Clara could not answer right away. She saw the dust on his coat, the scar tracing his jaw, the faint tremor in the way he held his reins. "I was," she said finally, her voice hoarse. "Now I suppose I'm just here." He pulled a canteen from his belt and offered it to her. "Drink slow," he said. "Desert's a thief, it'll take your strength before you know it." She hesitated, then took it. The water was warm but alive, and as it touched her tongue, she nearly cried. He watched her without speaking, the kind of silence that wasn't cold, only cautious. "Name's Hoda," he said at last. "Clara," she murmured. "Clara Beauty." Something flickered in his eyes at her surname. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. "You're a long way from your people." She gave a tired smile. "There's not much left to go back to." The sun was falling fast and the desert began to cool. He looked at her once more, then said, "I've got a camp by the ridge. You can stay the night. It's safer than out here." Clara hesitated, then nodded. Safety was a fragile promise, but it was enough. He helped her onto the horse, careful not to touch her more than necessary, and led the way across the reddening sand. By the time they reached his camp, the light had softened into bruised purples. A small fire crackled, sending up sparks that faded into the dark. Hoda handed her a strip of dried venison and some bread. She ate slowly, her hunger both grateful and ashamed. The firelight made her face look younger, though her eyes carried storms. "You live alone?" she asked. He poked at the fire with a stick. "Most men do. Just some of us admit it." Something in his tone made her chest ache. She wanted to ask more but didn't. Instead she said softly, "Thank you. For stopping." He nodded. "Would have been a sin not to." The fire popped. Somewhere out beyond the camp, a coyote cried, a long lonely sound that shivered through the air. Hoda lifted his gaze to the stars as they emerged one by one, pale and ancient. "Used to count those," he said quietly. "My father told me each one holds a memory. You stop counting, you start forgetting." Clara followed his eyes. "Then maybe tonight we remember something." He glanced at her, and in that flicker of a moment, the desert didn't feel so empty. When she finally lay down near the fire, exhaustion tugging her under, Hoda draped his worn coat over her shoulders. The smell of smoke and horse and cedar filled her lungs. She closed her eyes and felt, for the first time in months, a sense of safety deep enough to dream. Morning came soft and gold, spilling over the ridge. Hoda was already awake, brewing coffee over the coals. Clara sat up slowly, feeling the stiffness in her legs. He handed her a tin cup. "Drink. They'll be long." She smiled faintly. "You always talk like that?" "Like what?" "Like the earth's your preacher." He chuckled under his breath. "Maybe it is." They ate in silence, but it was an easy silence now, filled with the rustle of wind and the small sounds of waking life. For a moment she allowed herself to imagine staying, helping him mend fences, tending to the fire, living somewhere the world's cruelty couldn't quite reach. But she pushed the thought aside. Dreams were dangerous things. "I'll head to town today," she said quietly. "Maybe find work at the saloon." Hoda frowned. "You'll find nothing kind there." "Kindness doesn't fill a stomach," she replied. He studied her, then said, "If you need to rest longer, I could use a hand here. There's fence to mend, horses to feed. I'll pay you fair." Her eyes lifted to his. "You trust me that much?" "I trust the quiet in you," he said. The kind that doesn't lie. That was how the days began to fold into each other, slowly, quietly. Clara stayed. She helped gather firewood, learned the rhythm of his work, the language of silence between them. Hoda was a man of few words, but when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of truth. He never looked at her the way other men had, never with hunger or pity, only with a kind of reverence that made her forget to guard herself. One evening a storm rolled in from the hills. The sky cracked open with light, rain falling in sudden, violent bursts. They hurried into the small wooden shed, breathless, soaked through. Thunder rolled like the growl of something ancient. Clara laughed, the sound bright and unexpected. Haven't seen rain in months. Hoda looked at her, a rare smile tugging at his lips. You look like you belong to it. She turned to him, hair dripping, eyes luminous. Maybe I do. The air between them thickened, not with desire but with something gentler, deeper. His hand twitched as if to reach for her but stopped. Instead he said softly, "Stay another night." She nodded, and the rain kept falling, washing the dust from everything it touched. But peace in the West never lasted. Word spread fast in small towns. Whispers began to coil around them like smoke. The men from the saloon came riding one afternoon, 3 of them, faces tight with suspicion and pride. The leader, a lean man named Carter, spat into the dust. "Heard you been keeping a river girl, Hoda? Ain't the kind of company decent folk respect." Hoda stood still, his gray eyes hardening. "She's got a name," he said, "and a right to stand where she pleases." Carter's grin was thin. "You always did fancy yourself better than the rest. You think folks'll let this pass?" Hoda didn't move, but his silence had weight. Clara's heart hammered. The air felt sharp with tension. "Leave," Hoda said at last, "before you forget your manners." For a long moment no one moved. Then Carter smirked, turned his horse and spat again. "This'll get around," he said. "Ain't no future for either of you." When they were gone, Clara let out the breath she'd been holding. "They'll come back," she whispered. "I know. You'll lose everything because of me." Hoda looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I lost everything once already. This time I'll lose it for the right reason." Her eyes stung. She turned away, but he stepped closer, his voice low. "You've got nothing to prove to them, Clara. Let the world choke on its own pride." That night neither of them slept. The fire burned low and the desert wind rattled the shutters. Hoda sat by the flames, carving something from a piece of wood. When he was done, he handed it to her, a small horse, rough but graceful. "For when you forget this place," he said. She traced it with her fingers. "I won't forget," she murmured. Days passed. The town's whispers turned to threats, but the 2 of them held their ground. The ranch became their world, a fragile, beautiful defiance against the noise outside. They worked side by side, spoke in quiet tones, shared laughter that came like sunlight through clouds. When spring came, the hills bloomed with wildflowers and Clara's laughter filled the open fields. One morning, under the soft blue sky, Hoda took her hand. No speech, no promises. Just that simple gesture. She looked at him and saw what she'd been running toward all along: dignity, not rescue; belonging, not possession. They married quietly by the river, with only the wind and water as witness. His old horse stood nearby, tail flicking lazily. Hoda wore no hat that day. Clara braided a strand of her hair into his wristband, a vow more sacred than gold. The years ahead were not easy, but they were kind. The townspeople, seeing the steadiness of their bond, began to nod in greeting instead of scowling. The whispers faded into the rhythm of time. Clara learned to sing again while tending to the fire, and sometimes in the evenings, Hoda would hum low under his breath, their voices twining like threads of memory. One evening, as the sun bled its last light over the prairie, Clara stood outside their home, watching the sky burn down to embers. Hoda joined her, slipping his arm around her waist. "You remember the night I found you?" he asked. "I remember the dust, the thirst," she said softly. "But mostly I remember how you didn't ask for my story, you gave me a place to start one." He smiled, lines deepening around his eyes. "You gave me peace." The horizon shimmered gold before fading to violet. The air smelled of sage and wood smoke, and somewhere, a coyote cried again, not mournful this time but free. Clara rested her head against Hoda's shoulder, her heart steady, her breath calm. The desert that had once nearly taken her life now held her story, etched into its silence. If you had passed by that place years later, you might have seen a small house standing against the wind, smoke curling softly from its chimney. You might have seen 2 figures moving side by side through the dusk, their shadows long, their steps easy. You might have felt the quiet lesson of it, that love, real love, is not thunder or fire, but the patient rhythm of two souls who choose to stay. And if you listened close enough, you would have heard the wind carrying her words, soft and certain. I can walk now.